So this morning, we have Michael Hingson with us. Michael has been around. His bio is about, what, 3 pages long, Michael? There?
Something.
I don't think this guy needs any announcements, any introductions. I think he can stand well on his own.
So, Michael, if you would, you please share your story with us. The floor is yours, and just tell us about who you are and about your journey.
Well, first of all, I have been listening to your comments about registration and so on, and it's an unfortunate sign of the times that we have to do more of that. But Zoom has been really good, and I think this is the other side of the story. Zoom never thought it was going to get the kind of visibility as an entity for meetings and so on that it's gotten. It had been, and I'd been using it for several years as a business meeting tool, and it's worked out well. But then suddenly with the coronavirus, everybody and their brother is using Zoom, and their sisters too, are using Zoom as a tool to have meetings like this. And so there have been security issues that have arisen, but Zoom has been incredibly swift by comparison to other organizations at responding. And also, they have been really good about listening to people concerning accessibility. And I think that sometimes if we have to deal with a little bit more to be able to stay safe in these events, then it's worth it. So don't, for any of you who heard the announcements about registering and so on, don't overcomplicate it. It'll work out once you get registered and you just use the right link to go to the right meeting, then you're in. And I want to be included in those. I sent Rebecca a chat message just now saying that, but I hope to attend more of the events over time and listen in. My interest directly with all y'all, see, I talk good, is that I am on the board of directors of the Fort Worth Lighthouse for the Blind, and have been on the board since 2013. And that came about because Platt Allen asked me to come to Texas to speak at several events in early 2013. And in fact, I was asked to come and talk not only at Lighthouse events, but they set up other things. Platt's a great TCU guy, and so go Frogs. We were there, and it all began with Platt and Nancy, former development director, who set a lot of things up. Anyway, so my story. Well, I guess there are 2 kinds of blind people in the world, at least for the purposes of my discussion. People who are essentially born blind or who became blind at birth, like those of us who were born and were given too much oxygen, and so we became blind prematurely. And then there are people who become blind later in life. In the case of both, circumstances oftentimes tend to be the things that determine how well we deal with blindness. I was very fortunate because when it was discovered that I was blind and the doctors told my parents to send me off to a home somewhere because no blind child could ever really grow up to amount to anything, and all I would do would be to mess up the family because they weren't prepared, my parents, to deal with a blind child and all that. My parents said, "To heck with that noise. He can grow up to do whatever he chooses, and we're going to give him the opportunities to do that." I don't know that they knew all that they were getting into by making that assertion, but they took me home. This was in Chicago, Illinois at the time. But I was given the opportunity pretty much to do what other kids did. So as I tell people, most every day, once I grew up enough to be able to do it, I, along with my brother and cousins and so on, went down to the candy store and got stuff, and we walked around the neighborhood. And yes, it was in Chicago, and yes, it was pretty busy. Streets were busy. as I recall, we didn't have to cross the street to get to the candy store, but nevertheless, I learned how to start to move around my neighborhood. We moved to California when I was 5, up on the Mojave Desert, which is a pretty rural area, only about 65 miles from Los Angeles, but night and day in terms of life and so on. So we were in a town that wasn't very large, and I learned to travel around the country, the state, well, or at least my home area, just like any other kid would do. I learned to walk around. I walked down my street. I learned how to find my house. And I really did all of that on my own because there were no teachers. There was no one to help. And on the plus side, it allowed me to be adventurous. And from a standpoint of how we might view things today, on the minus side, having no teachers, I didn't get to learn some of the techniques, but I also didn't learn as a result, and I've seen this happen many times, some of the negative philosophies that people introduce about blindness. Because all I had were my parents and their conviction that I could choose to do whatever I wanted to do. And so I grew up really not even thinking about being blind as being different. I went to public school, didn't necessarily do a lot in school at the beginning, went through kindergarten, first, second, and third grade in Palmdale, and mostly didn't get to really participate like any of the other kids. I didn't even think about it a whole lot. I would go home at night. My parents would help me with homework that we were assigned. They would read the stories in books and so on. And I would take that knowledge back. And through that, I could sort of participate in classes. When we did math, my father taught me math. He was a self-taught electronics and electrical engineer. And he taught me how to do math in my head, which was a plus, and in the case of one class later, a minus. But he taught me to do math in my head. And literally, I was doing algebra by the time I was in the first grade. And didn't think about it. So it all worked out pretty well. And I am concerned about one thing here. I think my headset is dying. So I'm going to dial in. Sorry about that, but technology.
No problem.
That's fine. We can relate. We have those problems from time to time, right, Sean?
This would be a good point for that Jeopardy tune.
Yeah.
The dramatic pause.
Technology.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when it works, you love it, and when it doesn't work, well, you don't love it.
You know, Michael, it's funny because me and Kevin were talking the other day about before the iPhone.
Here we are, Mike Hingson.
I remember you were on an email list back in the days of the Nokia phones and the Talks program. That was probably my introduction to Michael Hingson.
There we go.
All right.
All right. So
let's see.
okay, you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yep.
You sound great.
All right. Sorry about that, but technology. All right. So I learned to do algebra in my head, and basically just kind of kept doing what my parents taught me, and kind of went along with what was going on in school, but wasn't really able to participate. I was kind of my first introduction to public speaking when we did spelling tests. So you know, all you guys had to learn to spell when you were in school, and you were given a series of words, and you had to learn how to spell them. And then on Fridays, what would happen is that the teacher would stand up in the front of the room, at least in my class, and say the word, and everyone had to write the words down, and then you exchanged your papers, and then somebody or the teacher would write the words on the board, and you would grade whatever paper you had. Well, lucky me not being able to see the board, write on the board, or any of those things, teachers had the bright idea that what they would do is that they would have me spell the words so that everybody could grade their papers. No pressure, right? So I had to learn the words and spell them in front of the class. I remember one time I missed a word, but mostly I was pretty much forced to recognize I needed to spell them right or I'd be pretty embarrassed. So I learned to spell a lot of words that way. And then moving from 3rd grade to 4th grade in the middle over the summer, we learned that there would be a resource teacher coming into the area who would be able to deal with blind kids, because there were now a number of blind kids in the Antelope Valley where Palmdale and Lancaster were located. And so I was going to, for the first time, have real access to Braille books. Now, when I was in Chicago, I attended kindergarten. My parents, with others, had advocated for a special kindergarten class for blind kids, and I learned Braille in kindergarten, but forgot it over the next 3 years. So my mom and I worked over the summer between 3rd and 4th grade to kind of catch me up a little bit with Braille again. And then with resource teacher Mrs. Hirschberger coming in, I was able to actually get access to books and truly get access again to being able to participate in the classroom. And so from 4th grade on, I was able to do that. Along the way, I learned about Braille transcribers, because back in those days, there wasn't any computer Braille. And the only way that you would get a book put into Braille, if it didn't come directly from the American Printing House for the Blind or one of the other agencies that printed material in Braille, is that volunteers would actually transcribe the books by hand, which got to be a real challenge when it came to math books and so on. But nevertheless, it worked out. So I continued in school and eventually went to high school and started taking all the same classes as everyone else. Also, over the summer between 8th grade and high school, I got my first guide dog. I had never used a cane before. Mrs. Hirschberger was a resource teacher and dealt with education, but again, no cane travel or anything like that. So I walked to school, except for when I took the bus. And moving around school, I learned the school and learned where landmarks were and so on, so that I could walk around the school and I could hear what was going on around me, so I didn't crash into things or whatever, but I didn't use a cane. Now, I am a firm believer that a cane is the most basic tool that any blind child or person can have, and that we really need to use canes. So the bottom line is that for me, not using one should have been terrifying, but I didn't know any better, so it wasn't. On the other hand, what I did learn how to do was to be very oriented and very acclimatized to my environment, because I walked around all day. And I didn't even fall down much. I learned where curbs were. I could hear the curbs. And the bottom line is that I learned how to be very aware of my surroundings, which meant that I had the skills that allowed me to be able to use a guide dog, and Guide Dogs for the Blind recognized that. We learned about the school from someone we had met who was a guide dog user. Actually, someone who used to live in Texas till she died, Sharon Gold. She was a teacher out here for many years. In any case, so I got a guide dog, Squire, and we went to school. So I mentioned earlier that doing math in my head was mostly a plus, but in my first year in high school math, Algebra 1, I had a teacher who insisted you have to show your work. And I kept saying to her, well, I can write it in Braille, but you won't know if there's any work there, but I can describe to you every step that I take in solving a problem. She wouldn't allow that. And I was failing Algebra 1. And so one day I said to her, okay, I've tried to tell you. So here's my homework from last night. And I plopped a piece of Braille paper with Braille on it down on her desk. I think I actually did solve the problem, I didn't write gibberish, but I don't remember for sure. But I think I actually solved the problem, just in case she took it to Mrs. Hirschberger, who was pretty known in the area by that time, or knew somebody else who might be able to read Braille, much less mathematical Braille. I had already learned the Nimitz code. Anyway, this is the math teacher did nothing with any of that other than to say, see, he showed his work, and she held up the paper to the class. Totally meaningless because she had no idea what was on the paper. I got a C that year. I point that out to tell you that the reality is, if you are blind, you are going to do things in alternative and different ways than people who have eyesight will do them. It doesn't mean that the ways you do things are any less. And sometimes we need to do things in a way that will be reasonably acceptable to other people. That paper was acceptable to Mrs. Duffy, my math teacher, excuse me, even though it was totally meaningless to her because she couldn't read it, she couldn't grade it, she'd never know if I did it right or wrong. But the bottom line is that that story got around the school, and from then on, math teachers would sit down with me. I stayed an extra period every day and worked in the library. When I took tests, my instructors would come in and give me the test because we couldn't very well do it during class when other people were writing things. The students would hear it and so on. But they would ask me questions even in class. They learned that I knew what I was talking about. I never, from the end of my freshman year all the way up through graduate physics, I never got below an A in math and physics. And that was because I learned to work with teachers and so on. I learned and helped them learn that blind kids could do the same things as everyone else. It's all a matter of developing some skills, being open to new ideas on all sides, and making sure that I did my part to learn the lessons and do the things that I need to do. Well, I went on through high school, and as I just said, I went to college. I went to the University of California at Irvine. Go Anteaters. Anteaters have never played frogs as far as I know, so I don't know how that would go. But I went to school there at UC Irvine, got a master's degree in physics and a secondary teaching credential. Along the way, I also happened to join the National Federation of the Blind, which is the largest consumer organization of blind people in the country. I did that in 1972 and went to a national convention in 1973 and attended many conventions after that. In 1974, while I was a first-year graduate student, I was at the convention and a guy came named Ray Kurzweil. Of course, we all know who Ray Kurzweil is. Well, Ray came and Ray brought this machine that he said would be able to read print out loud. He said that it's the first machine that will read any type style or set of type styles or fonts and so on, and literally read any material out loud. And in fact, it did. The bottom line is that I was asked by Dr. Ken Jernigan, who was at that time the president of the National Federation of the Blind, to become involved in a project that was going to take the Kurzweil reading machine from a prototype to a real production model. And the National Federation of the Blind had decided to help Ray do that. Never mind that whole process, except to say that we secured foundation funding, and we actually did get several of the machines. And the project that we put together was to take those machines, put them out into the public arena in places where blind people could get to them, and then blind people could be taught to use the machine with the idea of seeing how people used it, seeing what they used the machine to read, as well as getting their feedback on what features the machine didn't have that it needed to have. So when I was done with my master's degree in physics and I took some administration courses in 1976, I was hired by the National Federation of the Blind to do the Kurzweil Reading Machine Project, and we put machines all over the country. I had never, other than being at UC Irvine, been away from home. And one Sunday in October, of 1976, I got on an airplane and flew to Boston, Massachusetts, where an apartment had been rented for me for a few months to be close to Kurzweil and his company in Cambridge, Massachusetts. As I said, literally I had never been anywhere. It was an adventure. Certainly it was a little bit disconcerting, and certainly there were some fears and so on, but it was an adventure, and here I was flying across the country to do that. I worked at the Kurzweil offices for a while, and then from there we started putting machines around the country. We put one in Iowa, we put one in Maryland, we put one in New York, we put one in Colorado, and we put one in San Francisco. And for 18 months I traveled the country observing people using the machines, and then eventually writing the final report for the project, saying what people felt needed to be in the machines, what was good, what was bad, what else needed to be improved. And then I was hired by Kurzweil to do the same sort of work inside the company. So in November of 1978, I moved to Massachusetts and began doing that. After about 7 or 8 months, it was May or June of 1979, I was called into the office of the director of marketing for Kurzweil, and he said, you know, you've been doing great, but we're going to have to lay you off. And I said, why? He said, well, we've done the same thing that a lot of other companies do when they're engineering and they're startups. We've hired too many non-revenue producing people, and although your job is important, it isn't as important as bringing in revenue, and so you're not in sales, so we have to lay you off. And that's the final decision that was made. And then he paused and he said, unless you want to go into sales. Now, I'm a science guy, right? I got a master's degree in physics. Do I want to lower my standards and go into sales? Seriously. I thought about it for a nanosecond, and I said, sure, I'll go into sales. Was it arrogance? I don't think so. But I did know I didn't want to go out and look for another job, because I knew that the unemployment rate among employable blind people was 70%. I knew that finding another job was not very likely. And so I chose to go into sales. So Kurzweil put me through a sales course, the Dale Carnegie sales course. And I started selling not the reading machine for the blind, but they also had a more sophisticated, a different version of the technology. It was called the Kurzweil data entry machine, that was intended to be used by people who worked in banks or law firms or whatever, that had to scan and get print into computer readable form. Because even back in 1979 and 1980, we were starting to see companies recognize the value of getting data into computer readable form, because you could search it better, you could do more research, publishers could republish books, and so on. So I went through the sales course, and then I started selling the Kurzweil data entry machine on the East Coast and in Canada, having never been to Canada before, and suddenly I'm thrust into going into Canada. It was an adventure, and very frankly, one of the things that I tell anyone who is losing their eyesight is, I know what society has taught us. I know what society thinks about blind people. And I know that that's probably where you are. You're terrified about losing eyesight. You're terrified about the fact that you're not going to be able to do all those things that you used to be able to do. But the reality is, you can still do most everything that you ever did. Now, if you wanted to be a truck driver and you were a truck driver before, you might have a problem with that. And I recognize that. On the other hand, gee, given most of the people on the road, who wants to drive anyway? But the bottom line is, most every skill that you learned, you can still utilize. And becoming blind is really something that you could view as an adventure and a way to explore doing things in a different manner than you're used to, but still you can do it. And so for me, I was being forced to stretch and grow, going into sales, traveling now to a foreign country, and selling a product that was totally visual, because the data entry machine scanned print, had no speech output on it. But I learned that I didn't need to work the machine, and it was too big to carry around with you to show to people anyway. But I could describe it. I learned how to work the machine so that I could be as intelligent as anyone else at talking to people about what this machine did and why it was important for them in their offices. We always overachieved sales goals, by the way. And I worked for Kurzweil until 1984 when Xerox bought the company and phased out the entire Kurzweil sales force. Then I did have to go to work looking for a job. And after not finding one for 6 months, I formed my own company with a couple of other people. I was now back living in California by that time. And we formed a company called The System Connection, where we sold computer-aided design systems to architects. CAD is the way that architects can draw. CAD is a way that people could draw on a computer, and then they could print that out on a large plotter, so it looked just like architectural drawings, but they could do it much quicker, much more efficiently, and much more accurately on the computer than they ever could with what they did with normal pens and paper. And we sold the first PC-based CAD systems. And here I am, the president of this company, now selling the most graphically intense product in the world. Well, how can a blind person do that? Same way I sold the data entry machine. I didn't need to work the machine. What I needed to do was to learn how to work the machine. I needed to learn all the nuances of what the machine did, different commands and so on, so I could sit an architect down at a table with a computer keyboard and a digitizing tablet with a drawing pen and say, what do you want to draw? Okay, and then when we decide that, I could then say, here's how you start, and describe it. And the architect could follow my instructions, and if we didn't know a particular command, there were help buttons and all sorts of things that they could use to get the information that they needed. But literally, within a few hours, we'd have a house drawn. And the architect could see what the value of the machine was. Not only that, my advantage was I'm a blind guy doing that. And that impressed a lot of people who were interested in the product because I walked them through a process. I wasn't just sitting in front of a machine showing them how to do it. I made them do it. What that meant was, once again, I was able to continue to survive by now having formed my own company, and I was able to learn some new stuff. And we had a couple of salespeople who worked for the company. Some did better than others, and it was a lot of fun. But in 1989, I wanted to go back into the workforce, and one day, my wife and I just had sold my company, and my wife and I were looking at newspapers, and we found this job that looked really cool. It was selling special disk subsystems and special computer products from a company called Sun Microsystems, and the company that was posting this job was a reseller for Sun that was also developing some of its own technology. And so I said to my wife, well, this looks pretty interesting. Do I go off and write my cover letter and send on my resume, and in the cover letter, do I say I'm blind or do I not say I'm blind? That's the one thing that a lot of blind people face when they're going to apply for a job. Do I say I'm blind or not? If I say I'm blind, the odds are I'll never even get a response back from a recruiter or from a person interested in considering me for a job. If I don't say I'm blind, I might get a request to come in for an interview, and then they get mad when they see a blind guy came in. Well, you didn't say you were blind. How can you do our job? How can you get to work every day? It doesn't matter that I get to work every day. It doesn't matter that I came to the interview on my own. It doesn't matter about a lot of things. The prejudices build in a hurry. And so I said that to my wife. Now, I should explain to you, my wife, Karen, also happens to be a person with a so-called physical disability. She's in a wheelchair and has faced a lot of the same kinds of things, although not as much. I think that there is a deeper, more rampant bias against blindness because people grow up believing eyesight's the only game in town. With wheelchairs and so on, yeah, there's pity and all that, but because of Vietnam and so on, a lot more people are in wheelchairs or were in wheelchairs, and we're were getting some tools that they needed, and in some ways the biases were breaking a bit. Blindness, no. Anyway, I said to my wife, do I say I'm blind or do I not say I'm blind? And she said, you're a dummy. And I said, why? You know, wives can do that. They can say you're a dummy. And just to check, is everybody hearing me still okay? Are we all there still?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, good. Okay. Okay, sorry. So she said, you're a dummy. And I said, okay, why? And she said, well, you took a Dale Carnegie course 10 years ago now when you were with Kurzweil. What's the most important thing you've always said that you learned in that course? Well, I wasn't keeping up with her. You know, wives get ahead. And I said, well, there were several. Which one are you thinking of? And she said, you have always said that the most important thing that you learned in the Dale Carnegie sales course was to turn perceived liabilities into assets. And I ask you all to remember that and think of it constantly. Turn perceived liabilities into assets. What is blindness? It's not a liability, it's a perceived liability. And if you are learning what you should learn well, you won't perceive it as a liability. You will learn to perceive it as an asset. And what you need to do is to get others to do that. Well, as soon as she said that, this little light went off over my head, just like it does in all the comic strips. And I ran back to my room, got on my computer, which wasn't really very sophisticated in terms of speaking and doing all that sort of stuff because JAWS wasn't out yet or readily available. But I was able to type on it, and I could print on it and so on. And I wrote my letter, my cover letter, with my resume, and the last two paragraphs in the cover letter went like this. The most important thing you need to know about me when you're considering me for this job is that I happen to be blind. As a blind person, I have had to sell all my life just to survive. I've had to sell to convince people to let me buy a house from them, to rent an apartment, to take my guide dog into stores and to places with me, sometimes to take my guide dog on airplanes, because there was no ADA at that time, and the Air Carrier Access Act had just come into effect, and so it wasn't really well known. Parenthetically, I'm saying that to you. So I've had to sell to do everything that I want to do. So, new paragraph, when you're considering someone for this job, do you want to hire someone who works for 8 or 10 hours a day and sells and just considers it a sales job? Or do you want to hire somebody who sells 24 hours a day and truly understands sales for the science and art that it is, and who recognizes that sales is a way of life? That was the last two paragraphs of my cover letter. I got called 2 weeks later for an interview strictly because of those two paragraphs. I don't know for sure whether they were totally moved or they were curious, but it was enough. And I went in and we had what was something I could only call a good interview, and I was hired. And I worked for that company for 8 years, and along the way that company moved me to New York City. So in 1996, we moved to New York to open an office for that company. A year later, I was recruited away by another company, and then 2 years after that, I was recruited by Quantum Corporation. We were selling their products through a reseller. Quantum recruited me to open an office for them in New York because Quantum had only worked through other sales channels and didn't have its own office there, and Quantum wanted to be able to do more in New York, and Wall Street firms used a lot of Quantum products and said, if you're going to really make it here, you have to have your own representation, you have to have your own company office in the city. So I was hired. We opened the office, which was on the 78th floor of Tower 1 of the World Trade Center. Now, when I was moved back in 1996, we opened our sales office for the company in California that moved me back there. We did that on the 23rd floor of Tower 2. So I started to learn the World Trade Center a little bit, even back in 1996. But then when Quantum opened the office and I started hiring people, I really spent a lot of time learning everything that I could about the World Trade Center. I learned what to do in emergencies. I learned where various companies had their offices. I learned where all the restaurants were. I learned where all the exits were. I learned all the processes and procedures for evacuating if there were an emergency. I learned everything that I could, because many times I would be in the office alone, being the manager, while my sales force was out selling. Sometimes I would go on sales calls with them, but many times my job was to be in there supporting them, doing things with the home office, doing whatever needed to be done to make them successful. And every time I hired a salesperson, I would tell them, what you need to understand is, yes, I'm your supervisor, I'm your boss, but my job isn't to boss you around. I'm hiring you because I believe you know what you're doing and you know how to sell. My job is to add value to what you do. And with you, we'll have to figure out how best I can add value. With some people, it was teaching them more technical stuff. With some people, it was going out on more sales calls with them, because I could make better sales presentations than they could, because I was used to presenting products that I couldn't see. And so I learned how to describe. Every person I hired was different, but I told them all, I'm a second person on your team. You and I will work together to figure out how I best can serve and add value to you. I could tell lots of stories, but I'll move on. Well, I'll tell one. So one example of that was a guy I hired named Kevin. And Kevin came into my office one day and he said, I have a sales meeting coming up at Solomon Brothers, and they say they have a project, and I don't know whether our products will do what they need, but they want me to come out and they want me to bring my manager with me, because they want a person in authority to be part of this, because they're going to bring in some pretty high-level people. And I said, okay, sounds good. But Kevin was a really bright guy, and he said, so I got to tell you, I didn't tell him you were blind. Now, I could have taken that many ways, but I knew Kevin. And I knew that what Kevin wanted to do, because these people didn't know me, I knew that Kevin wanted to change all the sales rules. He wanted them to be not uncomfortable, but he wanted to force them to look at life a little bit differently and pay attention to what we had to say. And he recognized that I was an asset that could do that. Well, the day came for the meeting, and at 10 o'clock, the meeting was supposed to start, and we deliberately arrived about a minute late. So we were walking down the hall. Everyone was in the room. They were chatting. We even heard a couple of people going, well, where are the people from Articon? They're supposed to be here. And about that time, we walked in the door, me, my guide dog, Roselle. Excuse me, I guess it was actually Holland. No, it was Roselle. So Roselle and I and Kevin walked in the room, and the place went totally quiet. We just stood there for a minute, and then I said to Kevin, so Kevin, where are we doing this? And he says, oh, up here in the front, and I followed him up to the front. We got to the front of the room. I had a laptop projector and my own backpack with my computer, unpacked the laptop projector because we were going to display things on a screen for them. He said, where are we plugging this in? And he said, I'll take the cord, and he's plugging it in, and I'm facing from the front to the back of the room. I turned to my left, which made it the upper right-hand corner of the room, and I said, hi, my name is Mike. What's your name? Silence. Really, my name is Mike. I'd like to know who you are. Silence. So I walk over and stand in front of the upper right-hand corner at the table. There's a guy right in front of me, and I said, look, I heard you as I walked by. I know you're here. You can't hide. What's your name? Sort of being a little humorous. Then he finally said, oh, my name is Joe. And I said, great, Joe, glad to meet you. Shook his hand. Tell me, why are we here? Well, we want to know about tape libraries. And I said, well, why? Well, we got a project. And I said, well, tell me, just if you would, a little bit, what do you do? And he said, well, I'm an IT guy. Well, for you, what will this do? And he talked a little bit. I said, great, thank you. And I moved down, and I said, what's your name? And I actually got everyone finally to introduce themselves. And I took about 5 minutes to do that. And by the time I was done, I knew our product would not do what they wanted. Didn't matter. We did the presentation. I'm standing up there in the front of the room doing this presentation. Kevin is observing. And among other things, I would talk to people about, as the different slides came up, what they were seeing. I had a script in Braille. My computer told me what slide I was on. And my script was very detailed. I created it myself. Not only did it say what pictures were shown on the slides, it had all the words that were displayed on the screen. And it even told me, because this is part of what I wanted on the script, it told me where on the screen the images appeared. So I could point over my right shoulder and I could say, this is the ATLP 3000 that holds 16 tape drives, 326 tape cartridges. On the left side of the screen, and I could point over my left shoulder, is another device, and so on. And we went through the presentation, and at the end, I said, and as you can see, we won't do what you want. But I wanted you to see it all because I'll tell you what will work for you. And we talked about some products that weren't ours that would do what they needed. And eventually the presentation ended, and this guy comes up to me and he says, we're really angry at you. And I said, why? He said, usually these presentations are very boring. Yours was not boring. But more important than that, usually when people are doing these presentations, they turn with a pointer and point at the screen. He said, you didn't do that. You pointed at everything and you never looked away. We forgot you were blind. We didn't dare fall asleep because you were looking at us. And I said, well, you know, it wouldn't have mattered, because even if you had fallen asleep, Roselle's down here on the floor and she's taking notes. We would have got you. So there we were. Our product wouldn't do it. We spent 2 hours at Solomon. But 2 weeks later, we got a call back from the same people saying, we've got another project. And this project is bigger than the last one. And because of everything you taught us, we know that your product will do exactly what we need. We're not putting it out for bid. Tell us what you'll sell it to us for. So there you go. If you're going to sell, be honest about it. But also the whole idea of changing the rules. And that was my contribution to the process. So as I said before, I spent a lot of time learning about what to do around the World Trade Center and how to get around, and learned everything that I could possibly learn. And what I didn't even think about and realize was, as I did all that and kept thinking on a daily basis, what do I do if there's an emergency today? I was creating a mindset in my own brain. And on September 11th, when suddenly the building shook and it started to tip, my mindset kicked in, something's going on here. And as soon as the building stopped moving, I knew we had to escape. There wasn't anyone telling us, but the building didn't do what it did by moving like 20 feet one way and then coming back the other way and stopping. While it was moving, I went and stood in the doorway. A colleague of mine, David Frank, who was in that day for some seminars we were going to be conducting, David had flown in the night before from our corporate office. David was just holding on to my desk. Roselle was asleep under my desk. We had some guests in our conference room, and everyone was in place. I went over and stood in the doorway as the building was moving. I grew up in California where we had a lot of earthquakes, and so I learned early, building move, go stand in doorway. Didn't matter that we were 78 floors up, and if the building fell, standing in the doorway wasn't going to mean a thing. But what happened was that I stood there until the building stopped. I went back in, and I met Roselle coming out from under my desk. I took her leash. I told her to heel. She came around on my left side, which is what she was supposed to do, and sat. And about that time, the building dropped straight down about 6 feet, as scary as it gets. For me, it was just something else that happened to convince me we needed to get out. As soon as the building stopped moving, David, who was holding onto my desk, turned and looked out the window and started shouting, "Oh my God, Mike, there's fire and smoke above us and millions of pieces of burning paper falling outside our windows. We got to get out of here right now. We can't stay here. We got to get out. The building's on fire." And I said, "Slow down, David. We'll get out." "No, we got to get out of here." Our guests began to scream. They started moving toward our exit. And I again said, "David, slow down. Stop. We'll get out of here." I guess that stopped our guests too, because they didn't leave. And David said, "We got to get out of here right now. We can't stay here." And then finally he used the big line. "You don't understand. You can't see it." Well, first of all, I heard debris falling outside the window, and when he told me there were millions of pieces of burning paper falling outside the window, I had a good idea of what was going on. And I certainly could see in my way what was happening. And my imagination is pretty good. I like science fiction. I could imagine things that were a lot worse than what was really happening. But The problem wasn't any of that. The problem was what David wasn't seeing. I had a guide dog sitting next to me. She wasn't panicking. She was sitting there wagging her tail going, who woke me up? I was petting her head. And I knew from that that whatever was going on wasn't such an imminent issue that it made Roselle feel threatened. And the result of that was that I knew that we could try to get out in an orderly way, which is what we worked to do. And so I finally got David to focus, and I said, look, get our guests to the stairs, then come back and we'll leave. So David left with our guests. He got them to the stairs. I called my wife, Karen, told her there had been an emergency. Something happened. We don't know exactly what, but we're evacuating the building. And of course, she wanted to know more. It was way early for the media to get access to the story. So I scooped Good Morning America by 8 minutes. I love to say that. But bottom line is, I told her what was happening. I said, I don't know anymore. I disconnected. David came back. We swept the office. We went to the stairs, and we started down. And I am now going to try to
get my headset back. I think that'll be. Hear me still?
Yes.
I think so. Oh, good. Okay, so now we're back with the headset. Better audio. In any case, so David came back. We swept the office. We went to the stairs, and
oh, no, Michael, we lost the audio.
Oops.
Let's see. Are you there, Mike? Are you there?
There we go.
Okay,
there we
perfect.
go. Technology. Okay. It's worth better audio. So we swept the offices, we went to the stairs, and we started down. Almost immediately, I began smelling an odor. I wasn't sure what it was. I couldn't place it. It was familiar. It took me about 4 floors to realize I was smelling the fumes from burning jet fuel. I smelled them. I smelled fumes a lot when I did a lot of traveling at airports. I did a lot of travel for my company. I traveled 100,000 miles a year on airplanes. And so I recognized it finally, and I observed to others around me, hey, that smell, that's burning jet fuel. And others said, yeah, we were trying to figure it out. We must have been hit by an airplane. But that's all we knew. No one was telling us anything. The people who were near us on the stairs had come from our side of the building. They hadn't seen an airplane hit the building, so we didn't know. We walked down about 10 floors. Roselle was doing a great job. I knew that what I needed to do was to encourage her by praising her and telling her, you're doing a good job, good girl, and just keeping her focused. That also helped me because I knew that I didn't dare allow fear to get into my mind. If I started to worry about what was going on, is a building going to collapse on us, what's happening, if I allowed myself to go down that road, then I could panic. And I don't like to do that. I'm not trying to say I like to be in control, but I certainly do like to control my own mind. And I knew that panicking wasn't going to help any of us. And so we worked at it. And I just kept encouraging Roselle. We got down about 10 floors, and then a voice from above us, burn victim coming through, please move to the side of the stairs. And we did. We moved to the side. The stairs were wide enough to do that, and a group of people surrounding a woman who was very badly burned passed us on the stairs, and then they went on down. We walked a few more floors, and then again, burn victim coming through, move to the side of the stairs. And we did, and another group passed us, and David said, this person is even more badly burned than the first person was. And right after that, a woman near us on the stairs stopped, and she said, I can't go on, I can't breathe, we're not going to make it out of here. And I stopped. I was right below her on the stairs. I turned and faced her, and other people stopped, and we literally surrounded her and had a group hug right there on the stairs. And I said, come on, you can go on. Roselle gave her some kisses, and other people encouraged her, and she was able to keep going. That was the teamwork that we got to experience all the way down, people helping each other, people making sure that when someone looked like they were going to panic, there were enough of us who could keep our presence of mind to know that panic would only hurt all of us, and we needed to keep everybody focused. We got to about the 50th floor, and David suddenly said, "Mike, we're going to die. We're not going to make it out of here." And I noticed that David had been getting a little bit quieter, but then he said that, and I just said, "Stop it, David. If Roselle and I can go down these stairs, so can you." And I snapped at him as hard and as loud as I could, because I needed to get him out of wherever he was going. When I did that, he did come back, if you will, and he said to me, "Okay, I need to keep my mind on something. I'm going to walk before below you on the stairs and tell you what I see. That's why I've got something else to do." I said, "Okay." Did I need him to do that? No. But it's always helpful. The more information, the better, is my way of looking at it. So suddenly I'm on the 49th floor, and David, "I'm on the 48th floor. Everything is clear here, going on down the stairs." What David did, and I'll explain it in a second, I think was one of the most tremendous things that I experienced that day. I got down to the 48th floor. "David, 47th floor, all going well, all clear, Mike, going down." And that's what I heard all the way down the stairs. Why do I think that what David did was so great? Because what David was doing, even though he felt he was shouting to me, David was actually telling anyone within the sound of his voice what he could hear on the stairs or see on the stairs. David was giving everyone a beacon. People above him knew somewhere below them on the stairs someone was okay. People many, many floors below him heard from above. 45th floor, all clear. They knew somewhere above them people were okay. He gave people something to focus on. That had to help people stay calm. And so the result was that people stayed calm. 44th floor, "Hey, this is where the Port Authority cafeteria is, not stopping, going on down." So he did that all the way down. And finally we got to the 30th floor, he did, and he said, "Hey, I'm at the 30th floor and I see firefighters coming up the stairs. Everybody move to the side, let them by." I go on down to where he is, and I say, "What do you see?" And he said, "Well, they're not quite here yet, but they're coming." And they're dressed in their heavy protective clothing, and they've got fire axes, oxygen cylinders, backpacks with all the stuff they have to fight the fire. And I knew that they had to carry all their own equipment, because what if you put the equipment on, let's say, floor 91, and there's a fire on floor 90? You couldn't get to the equipment. They had to carry their own equipment up the stairs. And that's what they did. The first guy gets to us, and he stops in front of me, and I'm sure several of you have heard this before, but he stops in front of me. He goes, "Hey, buddy, you okay?" And I go, "Yeah." You know, he's talking in this good New York accent. You know what I'm saying? And he said, "You okay?" And I said, "Yeah, we're fine." He says, "Well, that's really great. We're going to send somebody down the stairs with you to make sure you get out." And I said, "No, you don't need to do that. I'm fine. I got my guide dog. We're really good." And he says, "No, we're going to send somebody with you." And I said, "No, I really don't want you to do that." I had reasons, and I'll explain in a moment. In any case, he said, "Well, we're going to send somebody anyway." And I said, "Look, I got my guide dog. We just came down from the 78th floor. We're really okay." And he goes, "Well, that's really nice." And he starts petting Roselle. What a nice dog. It wasn't the time to give him a lecture. Don't pet a guide dog in harness. The dog's working. And all of you probably know this, but if you have a guide dog, and if you don't have a guide dog, doesn't matter. Don't pet guide dog in harness. Dog is working. If people want to come up and pet your dog and you have a guide dog, don't let them pet your guide dog while in harness, because the dog is working. It's a distraction. The dog needs to understand the sanctity and the sacredness of the harness, if you will. And he should have known better, the fire guy. But anyway, it also wasn't the time to give him a lecture about blindness isn't the problem. It's your own attitudes about blindness that tend to be the problem. But nevertheless, we have what we have. So we continued down the stairs. Well, I'm sorry, we didn't go down the stairs yet. He kept saying, "We're going to send somebody with you." And I finally said to him, I said, "Look, I got my friend David here who can see. I can play the sight card too." I said, "David and I are working together." And he turns to David. He goes, "You're with him?" And David goes, "Yeah, leave him alone. He's fine." "Okay, then we're going to go up the stairs." And he pets Roselle a few more times, and then he goes on up the stairs, followed by his colleagues, having probably just gotten the last unconditional love he ever got in his life. I don't know. I don't know whether he came down, whether he perished or what. I never saw him again. Why did I resist? Because he's part of a team. they're all carrying equipment up the stairs. They would have had to give his equipment to somebody else, or somebody's equipment had to be split up to other people if they were going to send somebody with me. But more important than that, that person was going to grab my arm every time I wanted to walk down a stair, and he's going to probably try to lift me up, these big, heavy guys. They're not going to know how to guide a blind person. It would have made it a more dangerous situation, and I didn't need that. There was nothing that he was going to really be able to do to add value to me going down the stairs, any more than he could have added value to any sighted person going down the stairs. It's not arrogance, it's reality. Anyway, we continued down the stairs. David reassumed his scouting position. Along the way, someone passed up bottles of water, and it was getting pretty hot because of all the humanity on the stairs. And David brought a bottle up, and we gave Roselle some water, and we had some water, and then David got back to his scouting position. And finally, we got to the bottom of the tower, went out into the lobby, and as we came out into the lobby of One World Trade, people were shouting, "Go this way, don't go that way. No, don't go outside, come this way." We had no idea what was going on. We didn't know why they were having people do what they were doing. But it became obvious many days later, as we learned more about it, that what they were doing was not letting people go outside because people were jumping from the higher floors above the fires. And so that was an issue. But we went through, as soon as we got out into the lobby, a guy comes over and he says he's with the FBI and he'll get us where we need to go. And we went through the complex with him and finally made it outside into sunlight. And as we got outside and looked around, people instructed us leave the area. But before we did, David looked around and he said, "Mike, there's fire in Tower 2. And I said, "What?" He said, "Yeah, there's fire in Tower 2. "You're sure?" "Yeah." We stood there, and then we just walked over to Broadway, and we turned north and started walking north on Broadway. We were on the west or left side of the street going north. And we finally got to Vesey Street, where David stopped, and he said, "I can see the fire really well up in Tower 2. We're not far away from it, 100 yards or more away, or so away." So he wanted to take pictures. I took out my phone. I tried to call my wife, Karen. Couldn't get through. I had just put my phone away, and David was putting his camera away when a police officer near us yelled, "Get the hell out of here, it's coming down right now!" And suddenly we heard this rumble that became this deafening roar. It was Tower 2 collapsing not far away. As David said, 100 yards, and we were observing this 400-yard tall building start to collapse. Everyone turned and ran. David turned and ran. He was gone. And I turned with Roselle and started running back the way I came. We ran to the next street, which was Fulton Street. I turned right on Fulton Street, ran about 25 yards, and suddenly caught up to David. David had realized that he had just left me behind and was going to come back and try to find me. Turns out that I ran the same way he did and caught up to him before he started back to try to find me. And he apologized. I said, "David, don't worry about it. The building's coming down. Let's keep going." And we did. We kept running. And we found ourselves then suddenly engulfed in the dust cloud, all the dirt and debris from Tower 2's collapse. As David described it, the air was so thick you couldn't see your breath or your hand 6 inches in front of your face. I could tell you that the air was so thick with dust and dirt that you could feel it going down your throat with every breath you took, and I could feel it settling in my lungs. And that was what we were running through, and we knew that we were going to suffocate if we didn't get out of it, so I started looking on my right-hand side. We were running next to a building for an entrance so that we could try to go inside to get away from it, never mind everything else that was going on. And I also kept telling Roselle, "Right, right, right," wanting her to turn right at the first opening. Well, I heard an opening suddenly, and obviously she knew what I wanted, and I didn't know whether she could hear me or not over all the noise. Obviously she knew what I wanted. And she turned right, she took one step, and she stopped, and she wouldn't move. And I kept saying, "Come on, Roselle, let's go." She wouldn't move. And I realized if Roselle wasn't moving, there had to be a reason. And so I kind of reached out with a foot and with my handle on the wall, discovered a stair rail, and discovered that we were at the top of a flight of stairs. We went down the stairs after Roselle got a good hug, and we found ourselves in this little arcade area which was the entrance to the Fulton Street subway station. As we got to the bottom, I heard a woman kind of crying near me saying, "Help me, please, somebody help me. I can't see. My eyes are full of dirt and I don't want to fall into the subway." Well, I'm sorry. I went over to her and I took her arm and I said, "Hey, don't worry. My name is Mike. I happen to be blind. I've got my guide dog Roselle here. You're like 10 feet away from the stairs. Don't worry." I knew the Fulton Street station. So she started kind of cleaning out her eyes, and I introduced myself, as I said, and she introduced herself as Carol, and we were standing there. There were a few other people around. And then from further down in the subway system, this guy comes up, he introduces himself as Lou, an employee of the subway system, and he said, "I'll take you down to an employee locker room." So we all went down. I asked Carol if she was able to see okay, and she said, "Yeah." So I said, "If you can, hold on to me. We'll get you there." Anyway, she could see. We all went downstairs. We stayed there for a while until a police officer came and said, "The air is clear up above. You need to leave now and get out of the area." So we all went up the stairs with the police officer, and we we first got to the arcade area that we had come through before, that I described, and then we went up the last 2 flights of stairs and finally got outside. We stood there, not really able to fathom what was going on. The dust cloud was a little better, not quite as much dust, but David looked around and he said, "Oh my God, Mike, there's no Tower 2 anymore." And I said, "What do you see?" And he said, "There's just no Tower 2. I see pillars of smoke, hundreds of feet tall, and that's it." "You sure?" "Yeah." We stood there for a moment, and then we turned and we walked away, now going west on Fulton Street. We walked for about 10 minutes. We were in this little plaza area when suddenly we heard a sound like what we heard when Tower 2 collapsed. I describe it as kind of a combination of a freight train and a waterfall. You could hear glass breaking and metal clattering, and then just this white noise of the building collapsing, going straight down. The buildings did exactly what they were designed to do. Anyway, David looked and he said, "Oh, Tower 1's collapsing and I see another dust cloud coming. Let's move to the side to get out of the way of most of it." And so we did, and we kind of hunkered down and covered our faces and stood there until everything grew silent. Then we stood up and David looked around and he said, "Oh my God, Mike, there's no World Trade Center anymore." I said, "Are you sure?" "Yep, all I see are fingers of fire and flame, hundreds of feet tall, and pillars of smoke. It's gone." We'd gone into the building 3 hours before just to do our job, and in the blink of an eye, it's all gone. Had no idea what was going on. I took out my phone. I tried to call my wife, Karen, and this time I got through. And after some tears on both sides of the phone, she's the one who told us that 2 terrorist hijackers had hijacked 2 aircraft, flown them into the towers of the World Trade Center, 1 into the Pentagon, and a 4th was still missing over Pennsylvania at that moment. That's the first time we knew what was going on. We spent the rest of the day moving up toward Midtown Manhattan and eventually learned that the trains were running, and so I went to a train station to catch a train back out to New Jersey, and David wanted to go back up to the Upper East Side where his sister lived so that he was staying with her. So he left me at the train station, and then he walked up, and then I went back out to New Jersey and got home at 7 o'clock that night. A friend of ours, Tom Painter, who we have, Karen has known for a long time, grew up in high school with Tom out in California, but then now Tom was in New Jersey, and we had renewed acquaintances, and I got to know him in New Jersey as well. Tom came and stayed with us, actually came down not knowing whether I was in the World Trade Center that day or not, and discovered, of course, that I was, and so stayed with Karen and drove to the train station to pick me up at 7 o'clock in our accessible van with Karen. So we got in, went home. I took off Roselle's harness, and the first thing she did was to run to find her favorite toy and start playing tug-of-war with our retired guide dog, Linny. It was over for Roselle. I thought she'd want to go outside, but no, she wanted to play. I guess we all take
the idea of relieving stress in our own ways. We eventually got Roselle outside, but I went up and changed and took a shower because I was filthy, grimy, dirty with all the dust and everything like that. And then we tried to start making sense of it. Eventually, you know, we learned all the details, as everyone else did, about what happened. But my office was gone. And our company didn't do a lot about that at first, and I'm not going to dwell on it except to say it's interesting to see how different people react to different kinds of situations. Eventually, on the 12th, I called Guide Dogs for the Blind because we realized that some of the people from GDB had visited us in the World Trade Center. I've always gotten my dogs from Guide Dogs. So we wanted to let them know that we were there and we were okay. And Joanne Ritter, the public information officer at the time for Guide Dogs, contacted me and said, can we put out a little story? And I wasn't thinking. I said, sure. She said, you know, it's probably going to get to be pretty visible. Do you want to be on TV? And I said, well, I guess. And she said, what do you want to be on first? Because they're all going to want to talk to you. And I said, okay, Larry King Live. And 2 days later, we were on Larry King Live for the first of 5 interviews on CNN. From that time on, we got inundated with requests for the media, and it was obviously pretty visible. Guide Dogs in early January asked if I might be interested in coming out and being their spokesperson. And by that time, people had been asking me to come and tell our story and do public speaking and discuss September 11th and the lessons to be learned and all those kinds of things. And so I decided to take the job. It made a lot of sense given what Quantum wasn't doing to support the people in New York. And again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, but I moved back to California and took the job, and Karen joined me, and we set up housekeeping in Northern California. And I worked at Guide Dogs until 2008. The new CEO came along and said, well, we don't need a spokesperson anymore, and you're not adding value, and nobody's interested in the World Trade Center, so we're ending your job. And she made the right choice. She was an incredibly brilliant new CEO. She was so good that the board of directors invited her to leave after 18 months because she had so demoralized the organization that the trainers were getting ready to form their own union. But anyway, people make their choices, and so I started my own company, and I've been speaking ever since. So what does all that have to do with anything? From my perspective, it has to do with the fact that we all have choices to make in our lives. We can choose how to deal with things that are unexpected that happen to us. We can choose to be negative or positive about going blind. We can choose to be negative or positive about being blind. We can choose to be frustrated in this COVID-19 era. We can be angry, or we can find ways to cope, to maybe grow and learn some things and be better than we were before, which is, of course, one of the things that this session and all the sessions at the Fort Worth Lighthouse are hosting. We all have choices to make. I can trace my life. If I step back and really look at it, I can trace everything that has happened to me to choices. And some have been good choices, some have not been necessarily the wisest choices, but I choose to believe that I've learned from every choice that I have made and will continue to make, and hopefully every choice makes me a better person because of it. And every person listening to this call has the skills within them to function, be just as successful as you want to be, or as limited as you choose to be. Those options are all yours and no one else's to make. And that's kind of my story. I'd be glad to answer any questions, and now we can open this if that's what you guys would like to do, to chat. I have something I want to end with, but I want to do that after we chat and all that sort of stuff. So Sean and Rebecca and everyone, it's back to you.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Michael. That was great. Really
You're right,
appreciate that. Yeah, let's open this up for questions. If you want to raise your hand and you're dialed into the phone system, press *9. That will raise your virtual hand, and Rebecca will recognize you. If you're on the computer, you'd like to raise your hand, it's Alt-Y. And with that, let's take some questions.
Yes. Questions or comments?
All right, we have our first hand raised. The last 4 digits of the number are 4620.
Is that me?
Yes, that's you.
That's you.
Okay, I was just, I had started to get down, but after hearing this story, I'm like, okay, I can't afford to just get frustrated because I'm having problems working voiceover. So I'm just so thankful and for the encouragement.
Have you been blind all your life, or are you newly blind, or what?
No, I'm newly blind. I've been seeing for over 60 years, and at 61, I can't.
Well, there you go.
Right now, but I just, in my house, I'm fine. I thought I was pretty smart, but now it's like, oh gosh, I got to learn something all over again, and it's kind of scary. And because if I don't, I'll sit here like a bump on a log day in and day out, and I just have the encouragement to go further, especially after hearing his story.
Well, there you go. And, it really is up to you, and you can either be a bump on a log or you can go move the tree out of the way. And the fact is, so you said you're having trouble with voiceover. Well, I'm sure that Sean would love to talk your ear off for hours about voiceover, and a lot of us would be happy to help. It is different. It is something you got to get used to doing, because it's a whole different way of interacting with a touch screen than what sighted people do. But you know what? It really isn't. I don't want to sound insulting or condescending. It isn't difficult, but it's different, and that's what makes it a challenge. But once you practice with it a little bit, then you can pick up on stuff pretty easily. And there is a way to put your phone into a practice mode, and somebody can show you how to do it so you can practice the different gestures. And also there are a couple of really good books about using the iPhone that are available. So I'm sure that people at the Lighthouse would be and probably are helping to deal with any of that stuff. And by the way, I'm 70, so I got you beat, and I'm still going. I'm going to continue.
I don't, because I was listening to those dates you gave me. I'm going, okay, he's older than I am, and just how you persevered and how your parents were your support team, and as a child, it's just
you can do it.
I mean, yeah, I'm just learning.
And there's also nothing wrong with asking someone to help from time to time, but don't ask them to do it. You got to do it, but you can certainly get help.
Yeah, because now I don't know where my phone is. I don't know if it's in practice mode or what. I mean, I can't find the button that says practice, and I can't find. I've been looking for the button that says done up in the upper right hand corner, and I was like,
Wendy, we'll talk. Yeah, Wendy, I'll call you later after this meeting. We'll take care of that. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Wendy.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you so much.
Pleasure. Who's next?
All right, Shauna, let's see. Go ahead.
Earth to Shauna.
Hi, sorry.
There you are.
I just wanted to say how impressive you are all along the board from day one. I love your spirit and the way you think, and it's very encouraging.
Well, thank you. Always glad to help too.
Yeah, I it's going to be 3 years in September that I went blind.
Uh-huh.
So it's very encouraging to hear everything that you've done.
Well, and no doubt that being blind is a little different, but it is not less than being sighted. And that's the most important thing that we all have to learn, that society tends not to teach very well. But
yeah. Have you ever heard of the school Chris Cole?
Yes.
I actually go there. Now it's virtually because of all the Corona stuff.
Yeah.
I was thinking that once they get done with this YouTube video, I would share it with my career guidance teacher, because a lot of what you said, I think she would love to share with other people.
Sure.
Good. Well, you have a wonderful day.
Pleasure.
Thanks, Shauna. Any other questions? Comments?
Really?
Well, Michael, I just would like to say for myself, this is Kevin again, that I think your story is very appropriate right now, given everything that's happening in the world, and finding something inspiring and encouraging in your story is certainly I think it's certainly timely with everything happening.
Well, I appreciate that, and I tell the story because I hope it helps move people. Of course, as you know, we wrote a book called Thunderdog, which is available through the Library of Congress, but of course we want everybody to buy it, because being a poor, starving author, it's important to sell books, but you can get it through Bard. And it tells the story, and it adds a whole lot more to it. But I want to, if people aren't going to ask more questions, then I want to say one thing I've been thinking about. With all the virtual stuff that we're seeing and all the virtual presentations, it has kind of led me to think about maybe starting a site. And the site would be, and I haven't even thought of a title, maybe Vision for the Future or something, but it would be a site that I would start, and we would take in members, people who want to learn about blindness. And it could either be blind people, or it could be people who are family members of people who are losing their eyesight. And it would be a site where we could teach people about blindness. And it would be a place where we could bring experts together on a regular basis, not just now, but for the future. And it would be a place where we could provide support, where we could provide teaching, where we could provide information, and really create something that could augment what other organizations are doing around the country. And I'm wondering what anyone thinks about that, and would you buy into something like that? We'd have to figure out all the logistics of costs and so on, and I would offer a really inexpensive price for the first select group who would become lifetime members. But do you think that would be something that people would be interested in, and something that you would advocate for? Any of you on the call?
Hey, sure. Michael, this is Sean. That is definitely something that we've learned for the last 6 weeks of doing this, is that there's a lot of people that, when the lighthouse is open, that would come to the lighthouse, but there's so many more that, either due to transportation or distance. I mean, we've had people from out in the rural areas of Texas that have joined our meetings just because it's something, it's something out there that they've never had access to before. So I think that's definitely a good idea.
Well, my thought is that it's not something to take away from people coming to the lighthouse once we reopen, but rather to augment and then give people a way to, in the case of clients of the lighthouse, in a more national scope, perhaps, be able to compare notes. And so I just think that it's something that we're looking at pretty seriously, and I'm going to work on putting together. And we'll do webinars and other things as well. But I think that we've got a lot of collective experience of a lot of people. I think I've learned a lot in the last 70 years or so to add to it. So it seems like it would be something that would be worth doing. Anybody else want to comment?
Yeah, certainly. The thing I love the most about this platform is the ability for each one of us to learn from one another. because there's things that I'm doing that maybe, that you're not doing and that you could learn from me, or vice versa, that
Right.
someone else who's blind, has in their repertoire a technique or a tool that I can learn about to augment my independence, and then to share with other people to pay that forward. And I think your story is definitely a way of paying that forward, to sharing that experience with other people to, to help encourage them. Because a lot of folks, when they lose their sight, they lose their confidence. And hearing, stories such as yours, kind of, for some people, I hope it expands upon that, the feelings of well, what can I do? Can I do anything? And then hearing experiences such as yours, I feel for some people, broadens their horizons and helps them to think that maybe there is more beyond what they think they're limited by.
Well, think about also family members who don't know anything about blindness, who just say, oh, we'll call the local Society for the Blind or something, and that may or may not be a good thing. But what they don't generally encounter is an overwhelming positive concept of what blindness is and what it isn't. And it is something that I think is sorely needed. And so that's what prompted me to think about doing this. And I appreciate the positive comments. And if anyone else, all the listeners out there, all the people on the call want to comment, I would love to hear your thoughts. But also think about parents of blind children. There are a lot of places where they can go and a lot of resources within communities, but that's only the tip of the iceberg in terms of the information field that is out there. And so I think we can offer a lot to it, and I think it will be exciting to bring this out. So literally, this is the first time I've talked about it. We'll probably put out an announcement and see if we get a few people who are interested in the near future, and then we'll start putting it together. If anyone is interested, I'd love to hear from you. If there are things that you think we ought to talk about, I'd love to hear from you. But anybody else out there want to comment?
We do have a hand raised.
Oh, good. Let's raise a hand.
The last 4 digits are 4775.
Hi, Michael. This is Lisa, and thank you for your words of wisdom today and your great thoughts and how inspirational you are. A couple thoughts is, well, first of all, thank you for the Lighthouse and for you being on the board. What they've done in the past 5-6 weeks has just been awesome for me, because I always think if I can learn a little bit, that's amazing. And every call I've tuned into, I've just picked up something, or it's given me a little boost that you need. And because I live further away from the facility, I can't get there as often. And secondly, to your thought, or starting this, I think that would be great, because I think our families, although they love to help us, they love to also do it for us. And so that's always so hard to tell them, no, don't do it, but just tell me how to do it or what to do it or where it's at.
Yeah.
Type thing. So that would be awesome.
Well, I think that family members and educating family members and others is certainly one of the major keystones of making this work.
Yes, very much so. And then out of curiosity, how many guide dogs, I have a guide dog, how many guide dogs have you had? I'm on my first.
I got my first in 1964, and I'm now working with Alamo, who is number 8.
Wow, okay. That's awesome.
Alamo's over here bored.
Well, thank you again. You are a very amazing man, inspirational by all means.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Now we have a couple of hands up. Let's see. Go ahead, Alice.
You are unmuted by host. Audio now unmuted.
Hi, thank you for being so encouraging. And I want to say the new program you're talking about would be excellent to bring families in, because my family is all over the country and they're trying to deal with me in several different ways. My son from Kentucky does all my computer work. My daughter here does the local things and also helps with the computer. My other son hasn't figured it out yet. So it'd be a way that my family could connect and learn things more about the blind, which is something they haven't been able to do, except my one son. Also, he has a sister-in-law who is totally blind, and she's traveled all around the world. And it may be a connection for her because she's come back and hasn't found a way to plug in. So it's really, it would be a help to a lot of people. And it's very difficult. Sometimes I'm a senior now, and it's very difficult for me to get down there except through the public transportation, which became a little bit scary to me recently. So I'm grateful, and thank you for coming and talking to us.
Well, thanks for having us. And, you know, public transportation can be a challenge sometimes, but, you know, it works, and you just got to get used to doing it or find some alternatives, and maybe over time things will improve, but public transportation can be a pain.
Yeah, it got dangerous. I was in 2 really bad rides, so yeah, I use them now, but that's a lot of people can't do that. So anyway, I'm thankful, and thank you for talking to us.
You know, there's another another transportation thing called GoGo Grandparents. I don't know whether you have ever seen it. They use Uber and Lyft, but I think using them is cheaper if you let them arrange for the rides. It's something you might explore that may be helpful.
I'll tell my daughter about that. I've never heard of it before. Thank you.
Thank you, Alice. And it looks like we have one more. I believe this is
next hand.
4620.
Okay. Hello. You
Hi.
know what?
Yes.
It's a lot. And going to different ophthalmologists and stuff, they really don't know how to help their patients that are blind. You know, all they know what to do is medical. They don't give me resources. And I just kind of have to remember when I was in the medical field, this old organization called Texas Commission for the Blind is where I tried to call to get help, and then I was directed to the organization in the workforce center. So maybe, you can give seminars to doctors who's willing to, if you can get any feedback on them, if they're willing to send somebody from their staff, when they encounter someone who has lost their sight, hey, this is where you can go. You know, these are the places you can go and get help. And even the job that I worked, they were just incapable of helping me to continue working. And it was just unbelievable what they didn't know or if they even really cared. And I know
a lot
Mr.
of education.
I know Mr. King came out to the job to try and help. But they didn't. I don't know. They just weren't interested or they just didn't care.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I will share with you guys one effort that the Lighthouse has been undergoing for a number of years. We occasionally do blind awareness trainings with students from UNT, the UNT medical students. And those are folks who are currently in college, on their way to becoming a doctor of some kind. And not unusual for some of those doctors to go on to become ophthalmologists. And so in the training that we do with them, we put them under blindfold, and we teach them some basic rehabilitation skills, just to learn how to use a white cane or some basic Braille, the exposure to technology. And the whole purpose of that is for them to understand that there are possibilities beyond sight. If one loses their sight, life isn't necessarily over. Obviously, there is a lot more that's possible in the lighthouse. Our goal is to provide training to those people, and so we're hoping that eventually, when they become doctors, that one day, when somebody visually impaired comes across their door, and they don't know how to correct their vision, or if it's not possible, they can refer them to us, and we can provide them with the training that they need.
The problem with the medical profession, especially the ophthalmological profession, is that they're taught in medical school that if a patient loses their eyesight, then they failed. And that is the stigma and the attitude that we really have to overcome. And it's a philosophy. It's just going to be something that we do step by step. But I believe that we can teach people that blindness isn't the end of the world. We have the Foundation Fighting Blindness that is formerly the Retinitis Pigmentosa Society. They're not fighting blindness, they're fighting eye disease that causes blindness, but that's not the only way people become blind. But their attitudes collectively have been extremely less than positive, let's best put it that way. And they talk about how we really got to cure these eye diseases so that people can see the flowers in the spring and so on. And that's so horrible to say when in reality I see the flowers in spring just fine, thank you very much. I don't see them the way you do, and you don't see them the way I do, but it doesn't mean that we both and all don't see them. It's a very difficult process to get people to understand that blindness is not less than sight, and that eyesight isn't the only game in town.
That's so true. I've been at the Lighthouse for almost 4 years now, and the outreach. And a lot of doctors turn it away as soon as you try to ask, can we put pamphlets in your waiting room? I have made a good connection with the head of nursing at TCC in downtown, and I speak to them about twice a year. We're trying to get something more in-depth set up with them. So we're slowly making a turn in the process, but a lot of doctors just turn away from it.
Well, and Jennifer on our board may be able to assist with that, being in the eye profession.
Got any more questions? Oh, good.
Belinda, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to go back to the topic as far as how connecting virtually because of these unusual circumstances has really brought out a lot of new opportunities for people. I'm a local school district employee. I'm a teacher of students with visual impairments, and I have a high school student who's going to be a senior next year. And so we've been attending these workshops every week. And I have to say that when I saw that you were going to be on the schedule as a speaker today, like a month ago, I got so excited because I read Thunderdogs several years ago. And a student and I started reading the book together because I have it on my Kindle, and she was able to her refreshable Braille display. So I just really appreciate you taking the opportunity to speak to us today, and just to be able to connect in this way. I'm really appreciative to the Fort Worth Lighthouse for making this possible, because it's been kind of a new and different thing than we would be able to do if we weren't all doing school from home right now.
Well, if I can ever help with you and any of your students or answer any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. Let me give you all my email. It's easy. It's mike@michaelhingson.com. That's as easy as it gets. MIKE@MICHAELHINGSON.com.
Thank you so much.
So glad to, if I can assist in any way, don't hesitate to reach out.
Michael, we just had a question from Mindy. She was asking, have you been back to the World Trade Center site since the original incident?
Oh, many times. And actually, I was there in, actually, the last time I was there was in March of this year. I was at the World Trade Center Historic Museum. And in February, I was there, and I actually went up to the 63rd floor of the Freedom Tower. So it's a lot different than it was when I was there, needless to say. But I wanted to go up inside the tower, and we worked out a way to make that happen, because I didn't actually have any business there, but I ended up having business there because I spoke to the Customs Department in the tower, and so I got to ride around and look at some of the ways that the building got reconstructed and so on. So yeah, I've been back several times.
Hey, Michael, it's Sean. I just had a question. Was there any kind of, did you have nightmares after all this happened? Was there kind of any kind of a grieving process you went through? As far as...
Oh, I'm sure. Never really had nightmares. I've had a few weird dreams, but nothing really scary. And I refuse to have survivor's guilt. Why did I survive and someone didn't? My answer to that is really simple. I believe that God left me on this earth to do something, and I hope I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. I think that it was a pretty natural progression to go from what I was doing at the World Trade Center when all the speaking invitations began, to do that and to work at Guide Dogs and then continue with my own company. I think that I was led to do what I'm doing. And I think we can always do what if, right? There are a lot of people who have some sort of survivor's guilt or another. Well, how come my sister died and I didn't? Well, I don't know necessarily that we can easily get an answer to any one particular thing, but the fact is that those of us who were there and survived were there and survived. And what we need to do is to look in our own way to see what that means for us. So I don't tend to go into the whole survivor's guilt sort of thing very much, because I just don't think that tends to be very productive. I was left here to do something, I'm going to do my best to do it. I'm reminded of, I think it's Michael Feinberg. He was the person who ran the World Trade Center Survivors Fund the government set up for families of people who were lost in the World Trade Center. And about 5 or 6 months before that fund was to end, he started getting just hammered by requests to extend the time. And he came out in a newspaper article and said, we're getting requests and so on. We can't extend the time that the fund is available. We need to move on. And in a loving way, he said, look, all these people that are deciding whether or not to take advantage of the fund, and it was like about 39% of the people had actually applied for funds, and it was now 5 years later. He said they're not contemplating whether they want to go off and sue the airlines or sue the Port Authority or anything like that. They're just not moving on. And I need to help them move on. So this fund is going to end. And, by the time the fund ended, I think something like 90% of the people had applied for funds to help them, but they moved on. And I think that's what we all need to do whenever something unexpected happens to us. As I said before, we can choose how we deal with it. Most of us who are going blind, well, those of us who are going blind, it's happening, right? Can we do something about it? Maybe we can cure it at some point. But on the other hand, it is what is happening to us, and we choose or can choose how we deal with our lives when that happens. And that's what we all need to do. Christopher Reeves was riding a horse and fell off the horse and went over head over heels and became a quadriplegic, and spent the rest of his life doing nothing but saying, I'm going to walk again, and not even moving forward from that mindset. And that's unfortunate. Chris Downey is a blind guy who 11 years ago, was a sighted architect and had a brain tumor and became blind. And soon after it was determined that he would not see again, a social worker came into the room in his hospital and said, well, we got to figure out what to do with you. And Chris said, well, what do you mean? And she said, well, you're blind. You can't be an architect anymore. And he said, what are you talking about? Of course I can be an architect. He made the leap. And by the way, you can find his interview on 60 Minutes from last year. But Chris said later, in reality, what me going blind has taught me was how much I forgot from architectural school, because it's not all about eyesight. And he's a successful architect today.
Yeah, that's a good point. We had a blind artist on a couple of weeks ago, John Bramlett, and his message was definitely positive about going blind and going through the emotions of what that was like, and then coming out the other side and just saying, "Hey, I'm gonna learn how to paint."
There you are.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's great that with this platform, we've been able to get folks like you, Michael, who've come in here and you've shared your stories. And I think at this point, we've gathered quite a number of stories, and I hope that each story is able to encourage someone else who's grappling with feelings about their vision loss and maybe feeling the uncertainties or the frustration that accompanies it. Because I can tell you from my own story, many years ago, when I started losing my sight, I didn't know really many other people who were visually impaired. And I was left to make assumptions about what life might be like, if I were blind. And fortunately, I was able to befriend other folks who were visually impaired or blind, and I saw them living life in a way that was comparable to somebody who could see, having families and having careers and being independent in their home and community. And I think that's and your story I feel really encapsulates a lot of that. So thank you.
Pleasure.
Any other questions or comments for Mr. Michael?
Hey, at least he didn't call you Kevin.
Yeah, I know, at least.
That's true.
Start.
Sean and I, we're voice doubles. Yeah.
So we get confused for each other. We don't look alike, at least. Not that I know of.
I hear my wife waking up, so I'm going to go cook breakfast.
Oh, wow. Sounds delightful.
Thank you for being here. We certainly appreciate it. And,
yes,
hope
Michael.
to hear from you soon.
Well,
Thanks
and again, anyone who wants to reach out, feel free. And you can always get my contact info from Sean and Rebecca or anyone at the Lighthouse. And any way I can ever help, don't hesitate to reach out.
Rebecca, did I hear your voice?
Yes, I was going to say I will add all of Michael's contact information in our wrap-up email this Friday.
Cool.
Along with the recording. And Michael, I'll send you a copy of the recording once I have it.
Great. And keep me on the list when you do the registrations for seminars.
Absolutely.
For future things.
You bet. Thanks again, Michael.
Thank you all.
All right.
Take care now.